Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. Calling in from the Americas. We're just waiting for people to come into the room, and we'll start the session in a few minutes. So thank you for coming. Sit tight. Good moment to get some water. Final bathroom break, and then we're good to go. Good afternoon, everybody. We're just waiting for people to come in, and we'll start in 1 minute. So thank you for coming, and we'll be going live shortly. All right, here we go. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for those of you calling in from North and South America. Welcome to the our last session of today, Risk and Resilience, a North-South Perspective. We are thrilled that you're joining us today and recognizing that in these events like Amsterdam International Water Week, they always save the best for last. So let's see if we can kick us off and have a really good session. My name is Arjan Bramskamp. I'm the Regional Direction for the Americas at the Netherlands Water Partnership. And for those of you that do not know NWP, we are the branch organization that represents the Dutch water sector and its affiliated stakeholders, from NGOs to academics and from the private to the public sector. We have a large toolkit filled with all kinds of activities that we can use in support of that mission: events, webinars, workshops, project development, publications, and communication support. All with the objective of bringing stakeholders together, cutting through silos, and basically being a little bit closer to a secure, resilient, responsibly sourced blue-green planet by the end of the day, at least compared to where we started on that same day. Not easy, as most of you will know, but we need to continue to lead the charge and think in terms of solutions rather than excuses. Resilience comes in many shapes and sizes, ranging from social to environmental and from economic to cultural. The cultural aspect is fascinating to me, as it determines the level of engagement, the length of the process, and the specific focus for each challenge. The premise on which we developed this particular session was to underline the fact that regardless of your place in the world, the level of economic development, the political system, and the views, that need for increased levels of resilience hits us all. How do we do that? We want to showcase that today by providing you with 2 examples of how awareness translates into opportunities, and then hopefully opportunities translates into policy and action. We need to acknowledge the need for action and a sense of urgency. So program-wise today, we will present 3 plenaries, one on nature-based solutions. Let's see if we can go to the program slide, please. Let's see. Let's see if we can get the program slide fixed here. How are we doing? Here we go. All right. So we are up with a little bit of difficulty, just like, trying to deal with resilience. So introduction, that's what we're doing right now. And then, of course, we have presentations, 3 plenaries, one by Todd Bridges, who I will introduce shortly. Then we have case studies on Maryland and Colombia. And then we'll have a brief panel discussion in which we can go into some of the issues presented today. From there, my job is relatively easy. I basically needed to say all the things that I've just said, and then I get to give the floor to these really excellent speakers that we have today, and get out of the way and let them do their thing. So I'm very excited that they're all here, that we were able to bring together such a powerhouse of speakers. There's room for you as well. I mean, this is really about the interaction with the audience. So we invite you to put questions into the Q&A when you have the opportunity, and wherever possible, we will try to bring them into the panel at the end of the plenaries. So let's see if we can get started. I want to start with introducing Mr. Todd Bridges. He's a senior research scientist for environmental science at the U.S. Army Engineer Research and Development Center. Dr. Bridges has 25 years of experience in the field and is the U.S. Army Senior Research Scientist for Environmental Science. He became a senior professional within the U.S. Army in 2006, where his responsibilities include leading research, development, and environmental initiatives for the U.S. Army and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Dr. Bridges is the program manager for the Dredging Operations Environmental Research Program, one of the Corps' largest civil works R&D program, where he directs the execution of more than $6 million in research annually. He currently leads U.S. ACE's, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Engineering with Nature initiative, which includes a network of research projects, field demonstrations, and communication activities to promote sustainable, resilient infrastructure system. With that, I seriously had to abbreviate your accolades there, Todd. So I hope you don't mind. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, don't mind at all. Thank you very much, Aaron. I'm happy to be here today to talk primarily about our work with respect to engineering with nature. This is an initiative we've had within the Corps that began in 2010 to give more focus and attention for how we can leverage natural systems to address infrastructure challenges. So today I'm couching this in terms of pursuing a new arrangement with nature, given the challenges and the opportunities that present themselves to us in the 21st century. If you can go to the next slide. There are lots of ways in which we could view the challenge and the opportunity set before us now. And the next slide, my slide number 2. There we go. And one of those is in the context of what we might call the multi-hazard world. And there are a lot of challenges that are represented here, from man-made disasters, failure of infrastructure, to wholly or completely natural hazards, and everything in between, combinations of those. To give you some statistics relative to the United States, since 1980, we've had 290 weather or climate-related disasters that have produced at least $1 billion in damage. And if you sum the total damage across all 290 events since 1980, it amounts to $2 trillion in economic damage. In addition to that, 14,000 lives were lost over that period of time. That's a significant challenge before us. The next slide, please. So if we consider what and how we use infrastructure, the next slide gives you some statistics for what we're doing and what we've been doing in the 20th century. So these numbers on the left show you what we built in the United States, we collectively, people, built in the United States in 100 years. And it's a lot of stuff. Just look at, the number for dams. We built 90,000 dams in the United States in the 20th century. And when you consider what materials we were using to construct all this infrastructure, it was a lot of concrete, aggregate, stone, rock, brick, asphalt, metal. And in fact, in the year 2020, we reached a milestone on planet Earth, not just within the United States, but across the globe, where now the amount of human-made mass in the form of these infrastructure materials now is greater than all living biomass on planet Earth at more than 1 teraton. That's 10 to the 12th tons. And you can see the curve on that graph in the center there. The doubling rate of human-made mass in the form of these infrastructure materials in the 20th century was 20 years. So every 20 years, we doubled the amount of human-made mass on the planet. So this curve in this graphic from the Nature article from last December really, I think, challenges the whole idea of sustainability. This curve just goes up, 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 up. What is the planet going to look like? Something like from Transformers, where every surface of the planet is covered with an artificial constructed material. And with respect to nature, how can we leverage natural systems or nature itself to actually provision or provide infrastructure value? So with the next slide, we'll just transition to asking this question: what do we mean by nature-based solutions? There are a variety of definitions depending upon your interest, but this is the most compact form of a definition that I could develop for us. We're talking about conserving or restoring, or in fact, engineering nature for the benefit of people and nature. That's the most compact definition of a nature-based solution. And it can take a variety of forms. And the one I've illustrated here, trees. Trees are habitat for birds. Children like to climb trees, but trees can also be viewed as infrastructure. They shade surfaces. They provide for surface cooling. They can actually reduce heat loss from buildings in the wintertime by buffering against winds. They support air quality and water quality. So trees and collections of trees can also be thought of in engineering terms, if you will, as infrastructure. So this is just one example of what we might think of the use of trees, nature itself, to provide function and value for people. Next slide, please. So we can expand this to include considerations of trees in other contexts, like flood risk management. So a study over the last, published a couple of years ago, examined the role of mangroves in the state of Florida. Florida has 500,000 acres of mangrove forests surrounding portions of it. And those mangrove forests are providing engineering value or infrastructure value in the form of reduced flood damages. In fact, for just one hurricane, Hurricane Irma, this team used insurance industry models and tools to gauge how much flood risk reduction value mangroves were providing. And in fact, for this storm, their calculation was that mangroves were responsible for averting or preventing $1.5 billion in flood damages for that one hurricane. So it's fair to say the conclusion of this work was that mangrove forests are providing billions of dollars of infrastructure value in the form of reduced flood risks or damages. Next slide. Another example of a nature-based infrastructure solution or nature-based solution would be this project on a river, the Atchafalaya River in Louisiana. The Corps of Engineers needed to find a different way for managing sediment dredged from a navigation channel. And what the team did was they supplied the sediment to the river itself, and the river constructed its own mid-river island. And you can compare the top two left photographs before and after. We supplied the sediment with a dredge to the river, and the river built this 85-acre, 30-hectare island that is providing environmental and social benefit. It's sequestering carbon. We've measured it. But in addition to that, it's providing engineering value. Since when that island developed, the hydrology of the river changed such that that navigation channel is now processing sediment more efficiently. So we have to dredge less often. And we save several $1 million a year in less dredging costs now, caused by the island being in the system. Next slide, please. So we can expand this even considering national security. The Department of Defense occupies 25 million acres of land in the United States and around the world where we have military bases or installations. And we're focusing within Engineering with Nature how the Department of Defense can invest in natural infrastructure or nature-based solutions to provide resilience, mission resilience for the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense is recognizing that it's both the built infrastructure and the natural infrastructure that provides for mission within the department. Next slide. The ideas that I'm conveying here is that nature-based solutions are deserving of consideration and in a very serious way, I think, because there are a number of advantages or values or benefits that nature-based solutions can provide. The local context, problem, and goals matter to determining how nature-based solutions can be used and how they fit within strategies. Next slide. When we consider about nature-based solutions, one I've already mentioned is with respect to flood risk management. We, the Corps of Engineers, Engineering with Nature, collaborated with the Rijkswaterstaat in the Netherlands and the Environment Agency in the UK, with the World Bank and with NOAA in the US, and more than 70 organizations around the world to develop this international guide on the use of basically nature-based solutions for flood risk management. We just published this online. You can access it from the website. You can view the international launch event that we had on September 16th. It's a resource to help guide and inform practitioners on how to use nature to reduce flood damages. Next slide. So just a brief point about we have to figure out how to communicate effectively and productively about nature-based solutions. We published several books to reveal examples, dozens of examples, more than 125 examples of this practice around the world. We have launched a podcast and a website. We have to share information with each other about how this can work. In fact, this summer I testified before our US Senate on a hearing completely devoted to politicians who were interested in hearing about nature-based solutions and how they can work. And finally, the last slide, that we have many opportunities, and those opportunities, the problems, they're gonna lie on a spectrum. There's the case where we can have wild and free-flowing nature. And we've kind of seen the outcome of when we try to tame or conquer nature. We're not going to be successful at conquering nature, bringing nature under our thumb. So most of the opportunities are going to be somewhere in the middle, where we're combining conventional engineering with nature-based solutions to deliver broad value. But to do that, we have to have a vision for what future infrastructure looks like. We have to modify and evolve our policy. We have to modernize the way that we engage with stakeholders and communities. And we need to be comprehensive in how we evaluate benefits. With that, I conclude. I appreciate your attention and your time.
Thank you so much for that, Todd. Some very interesting information in there, also some very concerning information in there as well. So we will get back to that when we get to the panel discussion. But before that, I would like to introduce our guest speakers from state of Maryland flew in today. So you guys are looking amazing considering the jet lag. You guys are really fighting it. I'm very, very excited about that. Risk and resilience in the Americas, a North perspective. So I would like to introduce our speakers today. Allegra Tartaglia, on the left in your screen, is leading the newly created non-governmental services branch as branch manager, setting the vision, direction, and execution of the goals that focus on building relationships with NGOs in an effort to advance MEMA's mission to create a more resilient Maryland where communities thrive. She's an experienced stakeholder engagement practitioner, and she was previously the business engagement manager, responsible for leading the private and public partnership private sector integration program within the non-governmental services branch and managing the Maryland Business Emergency Operations Center for COVID-19 response. Additionally, on her left and my right, and so your right, Jaleesa Tate. She is an experienced hazard mitigation specialist and emergency manager with experience in floodplain management and community resilience. She currently serves as the State Hazard Mitigation Officer and Mitigation Branch Manager for the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. Jaleesa leads strategy and recommendation development to build community resilience throughout the state of Maryland. Nationally recognized as a thought leader and has contributed to flood resilience initiatives with the Pew Charitable Trust and the Urban Land Institute. She also provides national and statewide resilience guidance through her service as the Mitigation Committee co-chair for the Maryland Association of Floodplain and Stormwater Management and chair of the SHMO subcommittee for the National Emergency Management Association. If that's not enough abbreviations for you, then I really don't have any more of those to offer. Your government is worse than ours when it comes to abbreviation, that's for sure. Jaleesa, you're going to take the floor first, I think.
Yes.
All right, so then the floor is all yours. Thank you for being here.
All right, fantastic. Again, thank you all so much for the opportunity to come today and share a little bit about what we're doing specifically within our department, the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, and then also throughout our state as well too. We can continue through to the next slide. So essentially today, what we want to cover is we want to offer a little bit about what we have actually done in our communities, and then also provide you with some ideas of what we hope to accomplish on the horizon as well too. So we will kind of talk through our regulatory framework, the actual case studies of successfully implementing nature-based solutions, and then we'll go on to discuss, the benefits of bilateral partnerships and what we feel like actually needs to happen so that we can continuously have like an environment that fosters the implementation of nature-based solutions. All right, next slide. Okay, so with that, within our department, we take a multi-prong approach to risk and resilience. And so what we mean by that is that we don't believe that there is like a one-size-fits-all solution for the things that we are trying to accomplish. So we definitely look at it through the lens of implementation. So for us, most of the time, that means what hazard mitigation projects are we actually implementing? So that is how we get actual nature-based solutions on the ground. The regulatory framework, that's all of our, it could be federal, state, or local laws and regulations and policies that really kind of lay out the framework and provide the resources for us to implement these nature-based solutions. Partnerships, I'm really excited, number one, because we've, been working on a partnership with the Dutch Resilience Hub, the Baltimore Rotterdam Sister Cities Committee, and what we've done is from emergency management, we kind of look at this as we've taken a very non-traditional approach to kind of seeking out different partners and stakeholders in the work that we're doing. And so we have also very intentionally formed partnerships and relationships with environmentally focused organizations. So the Nature Conservancy is also a very large organization that we've partnered with to make sure that we are looking through things through like a multitude of different sectors. So looking at the social impact. So how do we ensure that when we are implementing nature-based solutions that we are actually making sure that these projects have co-benefits to them that also provide amenities to our communities? And how do we make sure that we're building community buy-in through this process too? And then last, but certainly not least, is definitely the risk analysis portion of this work as well too. So a lot of times I like to tell people when we start thinking about climate change impacts, oftentimes people are using kind of these points of, 2050, 2100. But the reality of it is that we're actually feeling a lot of those impacts today. And the opening of the conference this morning, I really loved it because the statement was made is that it's not only what we should be doing 50 years from now, but it's what do we actually need to do next week? Because that's the position that we're actually in. So with our risk analysis, we're looking at real-time solutions and identifying the risk, and then also looking further out as well too. Right, and next slide. So with that, as far as kind of the framework that we have in place that's set up to help us, I'll say, make sure that we can implement nature-based solutions. So some people might ask the question of, well, which came first, the actual implementation or the regulatory framework? So it's kind of like this question of like the chicken or the egg. So I would say from my perspective, I feel like in Maryland, the implementation has definitely come first because we've been able to use projects that we've implemented to basically use those as demonstration points to say, hey, nature-based solutions, they have value and that they can be successful. And I think that has played a lot into then like further developing policy and frameworks. So at the national level, previously you heard about the work that's happening at the Army Corps of Engineers and how they've kind of refined their focus. We've also seen that at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is essentially our federal level counterparts. So they've rolled out a new program called Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. And throughout that new program, they've really focused on promoting nature-based solutions, green infrastructure, climate adaptation and resilience, and social vulnerability as well too. And just this past Friday, FEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, they also just rolled out a website completely devoted to implementing green and nature-based solutions. So then at the state level, we have a multitude of things that kind of set the pace for us to be able to implement these solutions as well too. So just this past legislative session in Maryland, we established a $25 million resilient revolving loan fund. So that provides $25 million dedicated of state funding for us to go and pursue and implement resilience-based projects. Again, I spoke previously about our non-traditional partnerships. And one of the other things that I find really interesting that we do is when we are reviewing and ranking projects to fund for implementation, we do that with a very diverse set of partners. So again, what does diversity look like in your decision-making process? So we are working with people that represent about 10 different sectors to make sure that, again, we don't develop these kind of like one-size-fits-all solutions. And then lastly, our biggest tool that we have is our state level hazard mitigation plan. So we go through an intense process of identifying our hazards, our risk, also identifying our vulnerability, and then mapping out actual what we call mitigation actions, which would be the solutions for how to address our risk, so that we actually develop a roadmap. And then within that state hazard mitigation plan, we're very intentional to make sure that we create mitigation actions or projects that are solely devoted to our natural system, so green infrastructure. And next slide. Okay, so I'm going to run through a few of these examples really quickly because we do have pictures to further demonstrate these projects too. So we wanted to look at these from the different perspectives across different landscapes. So you'll see we're looking at coastal, municipal, and then urban landscapes. So for the first coastal example, this is a bioengineered shoreline stabilization project in a very small community. So earlier, again, Mr. Bridges talked a lot about combining like structural and non-structural engineering. So from our perspective, that's combining gray and green infrastructure. So that's what this project is. It was a grassroots effort started by community members to help stabilize a shoreline. And you'll see the pictures of that in 1 second. The next one is about municipal, so the Carroll Creek Linear Project in Frederick City, Maryland. So this is something that's been over 5 decades in the work. So again, a lot of effort to build and sustain community buy-in over that period of time. And it's also been the catalyst for a lot of economic development and historic preservation as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Allegra.
And as an urban example, we have the National Aquarium floating wetlands. The Baltimore National Aquarium is located in the Baltimore Inner Harbor, which also speaks to the history of Maryland and how it was born on a marsh wetland, and how the Baltimore Harbor was a port for import of spices from the Caribbean. Its social impact has reduced the risks of urban development. So flood water coming from the water plant, from the asphalts and the debris coming from from our transportation systems into the harbor, as well as cleaning the biological systems to preserve the aquatic animals and biospheres, as well as additional improvement in order to continue to clean the waterways and remove the nitrogen from the excess water from water runoff into the harbor. The challenges we have faced from this project have been the financial opportunities that are not available for all the private sector companies within the Baltimore Harbor. The Baltimore City's Office of Sustainable Development wanted to provide this solution to other companies such as the Downtown Baltimore Partnership. However, through various regulations having to undergo, there was a lot of hurdles, because if we think about a port, there's a lot of stakeholders involved at various tiers of government and also private sector. And so the regulatory frameworks for example, the National Guard were delayed some of the project's initiatives. And also ecological, the algae bacterial bloom that comes from the excess of nitrogen can be poisonous again for humans as well as animals. And so these were some challenges in the sense of in building more floating wetlands. They needed to be strategically placed. And so they're still looking at the development and the observation of its implementation. Next slide.
Okay, so this is a picture of the Bioengineered Shoreline Stabilization project for the town of Betterton. So as you can see, there's been like severe erosion in this area, and it's also a coastal area. So if you are familiar with the geography of the state of Maryland, this is right on our Chesapeake Bay, which is one of the largest estuaries in the United States. So over a period of time, Maryland in our region in general has made a lot of really great investments to ensuring that we improve the water quality of the Chesapeake Bay. And now we're starting to catch up and focus on the water quantity aspect as well too. So with this particular solution, it was very important to make sure that a nature-based solution was prioritized, because clearly you can see these homeowners who are living right here on the waterfront, you know, they obviously would not want to have a very like great infrastructure put there, but then also from an ecological perspective, having the vegetation placed there will aid in kind of filtering and treating the stormwater runoff as well too. So with this project, it'll be a mix of gray and green infrastructure. They will install a retaining wall at the bottom, a very low level retaining wall, and then the area will be backfilled and vegetation will be placed to help stabilize this slope. So this provides protection to a large number of homes for this particular community, because it's going to be 12 homes and there are about 250 residents in this community. But then also it's going to protect a lot of that critical infrastructure within the road bed, and also stabilize the road so emergency vehicles can also access that too. All right, and next slide. Okay, so the next one is the Carroll Creek Linear Park. So I wanted to put a map here so you can also get a sense of where the water bodies were in regards to kind of the municipality. So it is a lot of hardscaping. So with this project, what they actually did is kind of upstream in the watershed, there is a park, and that park is utilized to flood and kind of serve as a retaining pond almost. And that is the natural aspect of it. That is the nature-based solution. And then throughout this project, they've been able to have a lot of historic preservation and economic development as well too. And as you can see from that middle picture there, beautification was also definitely a priority, and they were able to work in some additional environmental site design with this project. And next slide.
3 minutes left, Jaleesa.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. This is an example of the National Aquariums floating wetlands. Again, the National Aquariums, their priority is saving animals prior, and in order also to ensure safety of the visitors and protecting their assets. And because of that, the risk analysis that they have to endure to analyze what are those mitigating factors that they need to implement to save their animals' lives and to preserve operations was this partnership with the Office of Sustainability at Baltimore City. And like I said, they're located in the Baltimore Inner Harbor, which is a flood risk zone and essentially a huge threat to their operations and opportunities, economic opportunities. Next slide. All right, here we are. So today we are a living and breathing example of our partnership across borders and across waters. Today we're located here in the Netherlands, and we just want to emphasize that during the pandemic, the partnership that my colleague here, Jaleesa Tate, was able to foster with the Department of Commerce and with the Baltimore Rotterdam Sister City Committee and the Netherlands Water Partnership has been truly pivotal to the way we have been thinking and the way we've also been communicating nationally to our counterparts in other states. And next slide. Looking ahead, the Maryland Department of Emergency Management truly believes that if we are really going to focus on our priority mission, which is to reduce risks and vulnerabilities to save lives and to safeguard our community, we need to really understand who our community is. And so they've pledged to building a new branch, which is the non-governmental services branch, which I lead, to engage with non-governmental stakeholders to understand truly the private and nonprofit sector, who are the employers, who are the ones that are providing economic sustainability to our community. And through that, we can understand what types of community-based projects are worthwhile focusing on rather than the ones we believe are the ones that should be focused on. And again, the flexibility we have been discussing day in and day out with our federal partners, that a lot of the programs such as the Building Resilient Infrastructure Community programs that was previously mentioned need to be accessible and timely, because if we don't have funding pools that are readily accessible, that rely on a private sector match that can be used now, we are going to miss on we're going to miss on the opportunity to build solutions, as Jaleesa said at the beginning of the presentation, a week from now rather than 50 years from now. Because at the end of the day, resiliency is just long-lasting solutions to provide social goods to our future. And that's why, next slide. That's why at MEMA, we pledge that mitigation is the center of the universe, because it's from the emergency, it's from the story, the response, that we really understand what the true needs are. And that's when we focus on mitigation, which is the cost benefit of, as Director Strickland putting all hazards at the forefront, hazard mitigation at the forefront, we prioritize building community resilience. And this doing so permits us to execute all mission areas of emergency management from a safer perspective. So again, we really focus, while we work in emergency management, we are not the first responders, we are not boots on the ground, but we see the holistic picture and work with various industries and really pledge to work outside of what we are commonly known as response and recovery. So thank you. With that, we have concluded our presentation.
Very nice. Thank you, Allegra. Thank you, Jaleesa. Very nice job on the improvisation as well there in the same room. Very, very good job. So let me just move on now. So we're going to change pace a little bit. So we went, now coming from the US, we're now going down the continent and going to Colombia. And let me introduce our speakers for the Colombian case study, which is Jeroen Klooster. He's an experienced economist at Arcadis, specialized in policy evaluation, financial and social cost benefit analysis and funding. Jeroen has been active for more than 30 years in different policy areas, including water management, natural capital, urban restructuring, cultural heritage, and transportation. Specialized in assessing the financial and economic viability of projects, including principles of circular economy and, conveniently, building with nature. Jeroen has been involved in many international projects in Asia, Latin America, and Europe. And within Arcadis, the Netherlands, Jeroen is actively involved in business development of water management projects focusing on Latin America, cooperating closely with Arcadis Latin America colleagues. One of those colleagues is here with us today, Mr. Jorge Enrique Sainz. He's a civil engineer with a degree from the Universidad de los Andes in Bogota, Colombia. He, since December of 2014, he's been the managing and project director for Jessica, project manager and senior advisor for projects related to studies, designs, consultancy services, environmental impact, and inspection services in the areas of river and coastal engineering, internal navigable waterways, dredging, river transportation, ports, access channels, flood control, and the use of water resources. And with that, let me give the floor to Jeroen and Jorge. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Arjen. Can we have the first slide, please? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning and afternoon to you. It's my pleasure, also on behalf of Jorge Enrique, to do this South American session, Risk and Resilience in the Americas, the Colombian case. Next one, please. Okay, so what are we going to present? I'm talking you a bit through the current cooperation between the Netherlands government and the government of Colombia on water management in the context of the so-called Delta cooperation. I will come back to that shortly. And then within that cooperation to present some cases. In the past, we did in different consortia combined Colombian and Dutch experience and companies. In the past, we focused more on general studies and master plans for different kinds of water management issues. But nowadays, we've gradually come to a more focused approach towards showcasing and implementation of measures. And we are highlighting two of those. First one has to do with the beneficial use of dredged material coming from access channels or ports, and the other one has to do with coastal erosion on the island of San Andres in Colombia. Next slide, please. So, as already mentioned, there is a cooperation between national governments of Colombia and the Netherlands on water management, and central in that cooperation is the perspective of trying to find solutions that are based on building with nature, or as it is now more nowadays called, nature-based solutions. The cooperation goes back to about 6 or 7 years ago, and since then a number of more general studies, master plans have been produced, of which, as Jorge Enrique of Jessica and Arcadis were all part, together with a large number of other Colombian and Dutch entities. And I will focus on two of those master plans, the coastal erosion master plan and the dredging of seaports master plan. Next slide, please. Next one. So, looking at the dredging of ports master plan, relating to the topic of this session, the nature-based solutions and beneficial use of dredged material, a number of recommendations came to light. Because as it is nowadays, there's only very limited room and experience of beneficial use of dredged material, whereas in the Netherlands and also in other parts of the world, this kind of application of nature-based solutions is already more widely accepted. And as shown in white in the bullets, a number of recommendations came out indicating that basically the concept of disposal of dredged material offshore, as it is being done currently in Colombia to a large extent, has to change. And it should be more recognized as a resource that has money, that is of beneficial use to the community. For that respect, it is necessary to adapt or to develop the legislation favorable to this beneficial use, and to develop mechanisms to match demand and supply of dredged material. Next one, please. Yep, next one. Then the coastal erosion master plan. A couple of years we did this master plan, indicating that, as you can see, with all the dots on the map, a large number of sites is being threatened by coastal erosion, and basically in the past years we drilled down and came to a couple of sites, specific regions, where there was a large support from all types of local and regional government, as well as communities, to develop more pilot cases and solutions that were specifically aimed at their problem at their site. And one of those regions is San Andres, that Jorge Enrique will talk you through in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Next one. Now to the focusing to the nature-based solutions related to the beneficial use of dredged material. We identified, based on the CEDA report, a number of potential uses, going from use as primary material to remediation, land reclamation, habitat restoration, and coastal resilience. Next one, please. Next one. Next one. Okay, thank you. Can you go one back, please? Thanks. So the type 3, 4, and 5 can be considered to be a beneficial use, as is meant by nature-based solutions, following the perspectives from the CEDA, as well as the EcoShape report. That is also a major base for developing these kind of solutions. Next one, please. So here are a couple of graphs and pictures showing differences. On the left-hand side, the more engineered types of solutions, and on the middle and right-hand side, some examples of nature-based solutions, just to give you some look and feel. Next one, please. So And now, when it comes to the implementation of nature-based solutions, there's a lot of things to be aware of. Of course, there's the specific natural system. What does the system look like? What do we have to look for? But also next to the natural system, you have to be aware of the institutional settings, the socio-economic environment. That all comes together in creating and developing suitable nature-based solutions for the specific site, bearing in mind the all these different type of aspects. Next one, please. And here I would like to give the floor to Jorge Enrique. We'll take you into some specific examples that we're currently working on. Thank you.
Jorge, you're still on mute.
Thank you, Arjan. Hello and good afternoon to everybody. So I'm going to show you two different projects in which we have been working with Arcadis in the recently, and shows how are we going to use the beneficial use of dredge material in some Colombian areas. Here we can see in the map the different port areas and which kind of use of beneficial use could be used in all of those ports. So we are thinking on coral reef restoration, land reclamation using dredge material, mangrove restoration, and the construction of artificial islands, building sand barriers, and a different kind of solutions depending on each particular case. Next, please. Well, this is one of the examples. This is the Buenaventura Port Access Channel. This is located in the Pacific Ocean. It's about a 35 kilometers long access channel. And you can see the red line is the inner bay, the blue line is the outer bay. There is a chart talking about the volumes, the dredging volumes. Excuse me, it is in Spanish. I didn't have the opportunity to translate it into English, but the thing is that in total, the project of deepening and enlarging the access channel of Buenaventura will give us something like 22 million of cubic meters in the external bay and 21 million of cubic meters in the inner bay. So that's a lot of, really a good amount of dredge material. And the customary way to write contracts, dredging contracts in my country, is just to send all that material to a disposal area, as it is shown here in the left side of the slide. So in that case, a lot of the budget of the contracts is just spoiled with the navigation of a dredge that has to come from the, let's say, the middle reach of the red part, 30 kilometers to the navigating to the disposal area. What we are doing now is to try to dispose all that material in to several artificial islands, and to prevent the erosion of those islands with a mangrove seeding, so it can be consolidated areas. So all those 42 million cubic meters could be useful to build some 5 or 6 artificial islands in which there is about only 4 meters depth in that area. So I think that we can do it in a very good way. That's one of the main points we are considering now. Next, please. There is something that we have to stress. The Colombian government, together with the Dutch government, carried out the National Maritime Masterplan, stressing the conclusions that were stated before by Jeroen. Never mind, terms of reference still consider ocean disposal far away from the dredging area, implying that a sensible amount of the budget will be dedicated to navigation to the disposal site and no beneficial use is considered. But after 5 years, after submitting to the Ministry of Environment and the Planning Department of Colombia, the master plan, the Ministry of Environment nowadays is preparing a technical framework which includes the physical, chemical, and biological characterization of sediments, including its beneficial use. So the new project, supported by the Dutch government, with important counterparts as the Ministry of Transportation and the Ministry of Environment, is recalling and promoting the importance of the beneficial use of dredge material, and both ministries are interested in the successful outcome of this consultancy. What are we doing now? We have been programming a lot of several workshops with all stakeholders and institutions that come together to a simple workshops, or that go one workshop with institutions, another workshop with the stakeholders, the local stakeholders. I can recall what Allegra just told us about the community-based projects, the whole community approach. So that's what we are doing now. We can conclude that in the case of Colombian maritime ports, the consultancy projects are driving the policy, although at a very slow pace. Next, please.
Jorge, there's 3 minutes left, please.
Okay, thank you. The second project is preventing coastal erosion and stimulating nature-based solutions in San Andrés. Next, San Andrés is an island which is 26 square kilometers of area, a length of about 12 kilometers, and an average of 3 kilometers wide. There are some big challenges when talking about coastal erosions. There are no rivers. Therefore, there is no sediment contribution. Sand are needed for housing and construction activities, and tourism represents 90% of the island income. So the good standing of wide and nice beaches are really very important. The main nature-based solutions considered are beach replenishment, artificial coral reefs to amend places where there is a breaching in the coral reef, and mangrove protection of shoreline. Again, we are including institutions and stakeholders, and several workshops are being programmed. It's very important to align the various stakeholder groups within the project aims. Next, please. Okay, here we can see at the left-hand side the potential extraction areas, which are in light green, and at the right side the maps of which are the 5 more critical areas from coastal erosion perspective. So what we are trying to match now is where demand and offer of sediments can be put together in order to conclude in a successful way this project. Next. 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 Here we can see how the coral reef breach in some specific point was the cause of the beach erosion and road erosion in the right-hand photograph. This is one of the places in which the artificial coral reef restitution will be considered. Next, please. Okay, so this is the consortium. I think, Jeroen, you can close the meeting with this presentation.
Yes, very quickly, because we are running out of time. But indeed, this gives you some impression of the how the current consortium is composed, with a very diverse group of organizations, both consultancy firms, research institutions like Deltares, but also Van Oort is a worldwide operating dredging company, an NGO like Wetlands International. So a well-balanced, at least that's what we think, a well-balanced consortium to address these fundamental issues. And with that, I would like to conclude our session. So thank you very much, and give the floor back to Arjan.
Thank you, Jeroen. Thank you, Jorge. Very nice. Let's see if we can bring everybody back into the room. So we'll have a small panel discussion. So if I can ask Jalisa, Todd, Allegra, and Jeroen and Jorge to all turn on their cameras. And I wanted to start with you, Todd. In this case, question that came in the chat. You, as Army Corps of Engineer, I mean, up to a certain point, it was sort of inextricably linked to successful large-scale gray infrastructure projects. Now the attitude has changed. How did green and resilience get into the fold, or do you feel that you're still alone calling in the desert?
Yeah, no, it's a progression, obviously. I think I would hasten to point out there are great examples of today, what we would call nature-based solutions. There are great examples of that practice in the Corps of Engineers that go back 100 years. So, and I could point them out to you. There are places on a map where those projects were built. The opportunity, I think, for us now is to how to learn from these more exceptional projects in the past and to make them more standard or more common practice in the future. And I think there's a natural evolution that happens, whether it's the Corps of Engineers or the Reichswaterstaat, you know, where we try to learn from the past. And I think there's a recognition, given some of the statistics that I gave, that the cracks and strains in the 20th century approach to engineering are manifest, right? They're showing themselves out. The $2 trillion in economic damages over the last 40 years in the United States from weather and climate related risk. I think we can do better than that. And doing better than that, I think it involves figuring out how to leverage nature, to partner with nature, if you will, as opposed to try to control, you know, nature. So there's a lot of advancement that's being made, not just within the Corps of Engineers, but within other organizations within the U.S. and elsewhere in the world that recognize this opportunity.
I agree, Todd. And also, I think the international guidelines that you pointed out, I saw that there was a lot of contribution as well there from, in this case, a whole slew of partners in this case. And also I saw our Reichswaterstaat and Deltares in that list as well. So it's good to see those international collaborations to come to more to more consensus-based approaches. So that's good. Julissa, Allegra, same question for you. At what point did you sort of, notice that resilience was becoming a permanent topic of consideration in terms of project development and actions within MEMA?
Yeah. So I can say that I feel like roughly about 3 or 4 years ago, MEMA was very targeted in trying to refine our focus. But quite honestly, I feel like resilience has really kind of firmly taken its place. I'll say within the past year, I think with the COVID-19 pandemic, it really highlighted the importance of being able to be completely resilient instead of just kind of, doing these one-off, two-off type projects where we have to be just resilient as communities. So whether it's to our, flood risk, whether it's to food insecurity, financial insecurity, I think this past year is where we've really seen it kind of take off.
And we have to remember too that we have to, public sector really needs to follow the wave that is taking off, in the sense that the Building Resilient Infrastructure Community opportunity from the federal government funding opportunity came right prior to COVID-19. And so interest from the private sector arose because any opportunity there is to expand and to do business development is always an attractive portion to businesses. And with COVID-19, also the financial industry now is talking about operational resilience and no longer risk reduction and financial risk reduction and resilience, but rather operational resilience, and taking into consideration the secondary and tertiary stakeholders that make up the supply chain of investments. And so going down to the smaller man as well. So again, I think, that resiliency topic, it's all about timing, and it's all about opportunities and cost benefit analysis.
Very nice. Thank you, Allegra. And I definitely think you hit on something there as well in terms of, the changes not just happening top down anymore, but actually being fueled by demand from the ground, people with their boots on the ground, and firmly sort of giving signals upwards and building those stakeholder relationships so that it moves from both sides. I think that's a good point. Jeroen, Jorge, from the Colombian perspective, public support for resilience and for the nature-based solutions work that you guys are doing. How was that? Was that difficult? Was that a difficult process? When did that start?
Yeah, shall I try to answer first, and then I give the floor to Jorge Enrique, because he is Colombian, knows the situation best, of course. But from my perspective, being a relatively outsider, what I see is that when starting this Delta cooperation between the Netherlands and Colombia, only the concept of building with nature and nature-based solutions was only concentrated in Colombia within the Ministry of Environment. There were a couple of, call them believers or people who would like to advance the idea, but the vast majority of other ministries, and also within the same ministry and other types of decentralized government, that has really taken a long way, and we are not there yet. But in my perspective, things are beginning to move and to shift. But Jorge, can you please give your view on that?
Yes, from my perspective as a Colombian citizen, I feel that we are really years behind the US Corps of Engineers or the Dutch government in consideration to nature-based solutions for engineering projects like dredging or coastal erosion. But we are starting to think really seriously about that. That's the reason of the two projects we are dealing now, in which some Colombian agencies are interested and are our counterparts in these projects. Although I mentioned it is a very slow pace, but little by step, the institutions are starting thinking about the importance of nature-based solutions, and they are also considering that perhaps the budget will be very oriented to environmental solutions that will allow a lot of savings in the long term. But in the short term, they are very worried about an increase of changing the mood of how the normal way of doing contracts is considered. But I think that with a little bit more years of stressing that point, we will come to some good place about nature-based solutions for engineering problems.
All right. Very nice, Jorge. Jeroen, thank you for that contribution. Todd, I'm switching back to you. You mentioned in your presentation that you were talking about diversified partnerships. You're talking about a faster and cheaper delivery of some of these nature-based solution projects. That sounds great. So does that mean that we are now come to a point where we can successfully make the business case for nature-based solutions and sort of discard the argument that it always costs money to make these things happen?
Well, there's still work to be done there, but I think the business case or the value proposition for these solutions is almost constantly revealing itself. But those of us who are working in this space realize that we've got to kind of elevate that information and the evidence base for it and communicate that information. That's going to go on for some time, I think, the need to do that. So it's not over with by any means, but I think we need to work together on, well, how we share information so that we're in a position to most effectively communicate the value case. And on the issue of the cost and such, that kind of argument, oh, it costs more, it costs less. It's like, in what kind of time frame? Are we thinking about life cycle costs or just my cost next year? And I think that is something that affects all of us in the infrastructure world. Is we've frequently taken too narrow a time frame to think about cost. It might be the cheap solution now, but it may be much more expensive if you think about the decadal time steps that we need to be thinking about with respect to climate change and other issues.
Right. Okay. Jeroen, you're an economist. I'm sure you have an opinion about this.
Yeah, I sure have. I think for at least a part of the stakeholders, specifically at the national level, the business case is very important. The stakeholders that deal with the contracting of the dredging activities, they of course, as they do in other countries as well. So Colombia is not an exception. They tend to look at the bottom line of the calculation, and we should be honest. Not all nature-based solutions have yet been detailed down enough. On the other hand, there's a lot of societal benefits that are not taken into account in the regular calculation of how much a dredging contract should cost. So there may be a case for funding from other sources, public and/or private sources, of which the beneficial use occurs. So that's another angle to take in consideration.
Okay. Very true. We're talking about impact, and when you talk about cost of interventions, you automatically talk about people impacted and people protected. You know, looking at sort of key performance indicators. I was very triggered by the example that Jaleesa put up with regards to the Betterton, because the easy argument there to make is that you are incorporating a nature-based solution measure that at the end of the day only protects 12 families or 12 houses. But I mean, obviously we've talked about this, Jaleesa, before, and I see a lot of the processes as well that I saw in the Staten Island communities as well that were hit after Sandy, and that started mobilizing themselves in reaching out to the proper authorities to come up with solutions. So there's a very strong sort of bottom-up driven process there. Where does that start, Jaleesa? Do people just simply knock on your door and just say, Jaleesa, I have a great idea, we should do it like this?
Yeah, so quite honestly, yes, a lot of times that is how it happens. Because while we would love to be everywhere across the state all the time, it is not something that we can do. So a lot of times, unless there has been some type of major disaster or significant weather event, we're not like actively in those communities to be able to look at that damage. So a lot of times, like especially in this case where it's been erosion, although very quickly, but still erosion over a period of time, the best people who are able to come to us and kind of say, hey, I have a problem here, I need help, is going to be those community members. So like, you know, and we have talked about this, although it is protection for 12, you know, homes, historically, a lot of what has been funded through these federal level programs has been a lot of what we call like an individual home elevation project, or perhaps like an individual floodplain buyout. So we do see this as an opportunity where we start opening up the gate a little bit to provide a benefit to a larger section of the population. And then again, the demonstration value from these types of projects. So in Maryland, we have quite significant shoreline. So when we do a shoreline stabilization project like this, we can take the results from this to other people, to other communities, and say, hey, a solution like this actually works. Here is the actual successful implementation of it. Like, let's do your community next. So it will kind of have like this cascading impact, basically.
And I do want to provide a comment, Arjan. You know, I heard Jorge mentioning that in Colombia, contracts, you know, contracting with, and Todd also talking about critical infrastructure and engineers. One of the biggest values that we've seen is that when the non-governmental services branch was established, because I was hired to basically work with the private sector to communicate with them, to understand what information they needed prior to an emergency, to plan their business continuity plans, so that during times of emergency, they can take care of themselves and let government take care of the rest of the community. But within those conversations, and this is the most interesting part, because we're at the state level, but we're having these very open conversations about risks and vulnerabilities, different opportunities of exchange of information come up. So I always call myself the fiddler on the roof matchmaker. I don't know if everyone knows that context of Fiddler on the Roof, which is a play, but I hear different capabilities of private sector and business opportunities for them. And I always go back to my colleagues and say, hey, you know, I was talking with such and such business. These were their risks and vulnerabilities, but I also noticed that these are their capabilities. Is this something that we're already doing in the state somewhere? Is there an opportunity for them to be part of a project in the state? Is it something that we want to involve our partners at Department of the Environment, Department of Commerce? So I think that's like our selling point in Maryland, is that we really, with this new idea of how we communicate with non-governmental entities in order to prepare them for any risks, we're also uncovering this whole new side of things, which is, you know, leading more towards mitigation.
Well, it's not like we planned this, but that's actually a very nice setup to my last question. We are running out of time a little bit, as is usually the case with these sessions, where when you just start getting into the nitty gritty of it, you run out of time. We do have a very interesting question from the audience that I'm going to send to each of you individually so that you can interact directly with Andrea Aldas Vargas, who is looking for examples, specifically nature-based solutions examples, when it concerns polluted sites. And I know that that's a complete game changer. So I think it would be very nice if we can present that question to each of you individually. Feel free to send that answer to her directly. My final question is as the climate changes, we're trying to anticipate our behavior changes, hopefully. We survive, again, hopefully. And we talk about like adapt or die as sort of almost like a badge of honor. We are able to adapt, and therefore we create a better situation for ourselves. Nature-based solution has a very strong aspect, obviously, of adaptation, but it's also about mitigating the negative impact. Is the proper balance there? I mean, that's sort of the takeaway that I want to send people home with, saying, are we managing both sides of the coin, the adaptation and the mitigation part? And I'll start with, I'll stay with Julissa and Allegra on this to sort of give final comment on that and sign off for you.
And I'll be short here because I want to be cognizant of time. So I would say from my experiences, what I see a lot is that we are focusing perhaps too much on a lot of the adaptation work right now. So I mentioned earlier, there is always so much focus on looking 50 years out, 100 years out. And in fact, what I can say is, like in Maryland, for instance, we're a very data-rich state. So we've done a lot of studies to kind of see where the, sea level rise projections, what everything is going to look like 50, 100 years from now. But what we still need to focus on a lot is the actual mitigation that we can take right here and right now to, number one, address the risks that we have today. And then number two, also start putting us in a better position to address those risks that will be here in 50 to 100 years. So basically making sure that we're taking all this information that we have gathered from all of our data and analysis and building our actual resilience right now.
And my comment would be, we're talking about how do we safeguard ourselves and our communities from climate change? Well, the reality is, what opportunities are there for private sector to, invest into climate change? And so I think that that's what always I fight back when I go to the National Emergency Management Association meetings, or I talk to my FEMA counterparts. I'm like, let me know how I can lobby, how I can, encourage the private sector to lobby towards this, because it really comes from regulations and opportunity costs for development and innovations. And so, as we saw even through COVID, a lot of our supply chain is outside of the United States, which hurts us. And so we need to really think about what are ways to build, things that could help us reduce environmental impact.
Thank you, Allegra. Thank you, Julissa. Jeroen, Jorge, any comments? Adaptation, mitigation, are we doing it right? Are we getting it right?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, Ian, I would say that mitigation is the easy part, because it's, well, not always, but in many cases it addresses short and medium term solutions, so including the quick wins. The adaptation is really the hard one, because it requires a change of attitude and common practice, and that's a difficult part. And I think that's a hard nut to crack, not only in Colombia but all around the world. But Jorge, I'm happy if you add to that.
Yes, I would say that adaptive mitigation combines differently depending on each case. I think in all engineering projects that need to consider nature-based solutions, we need to analyze each of them separately. So in some cases, adaptation could be the first or the main step, and in other cases, mitigation. But adaptation and mitigation are bounded together in a problem that is very clear in my country, which is governance. Not always governance is going in the same direction as the environmental thought around the world is going. And we, of course, we need a strong framework, and for that we need also a political support, because finally behind political support comes the budget to do the projects. So I think that everything is mixed together, and we need to think in each project one by one.
I give it back to you, Todd, on a cliffhanger that says apparently you need political support to get budget. That must sound familiar to you, right?
Well, yeah, it does. But at least in the United States, I see what I consider to be fairly serious conversations going on. That's why I included the point that I've never testified before the Senate before, but I did this summer, and it was on the subject of nature-based solutions. So these are sitting U.S. senators for 2 hours listening to people give them input on nature-based solutions. That's pretty serious. The president's executive order on climate change specifically calls out nature-based solutions. So these discussions are happening at pretty high levels. And I think those of us who work in this space technically, it depends on us. We have to be able to reveal the relevant information and translate it into forms that are digestible and understandable for a whole range of different audiences, from elected officials to members of the public at a given place and time who are accustomed to seeing a wall, but we're talking about a reef and a wetland and a shorter wall that's maybe made out of something different than concrete. Those are lots of different audiences that the technical people have to be prepared to engage, and to be engaged with the right language, with the right evidence, with the right information. So this is serious for us, the technicians, to communicate effectively about this topic.
Thank you, Todd, for that. Thank you all. I mean, this is where I want to wrap up the panel, and then I'll have one more closing announcement. But I want to thank Allegra, Jalisa, and this is going from left to right, so in no particular order. Allegra, Jalisa, Todd, Jeroen, and Jorge, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. I think we had a very productive session, very good session, some good insights there. And we'll be in touch, obviously, with some of the questions coming from the audience that we still want to share with you. If I can get the final slide, please. And I'm wrapping up right now, Dechen. So these are the upcoming events that are happening tomorrow. There's an interesting session tomorrow as well on water and agri-food, global challenges and local solutions, with my colleague Simone, and then my colleague Iris, who is managing the social inclusion in water management and climate adaptation workshop tomorrow. And then there's other conferences coming up. Today, there's activities happening in Dubai Expo that we're doing. Maryland is also in Dubai. They are everywhere. So that's also very exciting. We have the Netherlands Pavilion at Aquatech. We have climate investors meeting with innovators at Impact City on Thursday. And then we have the Netherlands Pavilion at the World Future Energy Summit in Abu Dhabi early next year. So with that, I wanted to thank you all for your time. I wanted to thank all the speakers again. Great. Thank you so much for your availability. Welcome to the Netherlands. In the case of Maryland, thank you for sharing your thoughts. If I can get the final slide, I'm going to leave this up here so that if people want to get in touch with you directly, they can. And with that, I'll sign off. So I'll let Dechen do whatever she needs to do to take us out of live space. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining, and here you see the program also for tomorrow if you're interested. So there are another awesome sessions which you can join in on. And I will see you tomorrow. Good luck.